Here in Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's been interesting listening to the debate so far this evening. I think there are a number of interesting democratic principles at stake here. The first is actually to do with our own democratic processes in the House, not really electoral processes. And that is that we need to have a robust and thorough process for making legislation. And I've heard, I think the Minister implied and both the Chair and also the Chair of the committee implied that because certain conversations were had at the Select Committee, then that should be the end of the discussion. That the MPs who were on the Select Committee should be the only ones who have the privilege to discuss this legislation, and that any agreements that were reached at that committee, that should be the end of it. Well, if that was the case, then we wouldn't bother with the second reading or the committee stage or the third reading of a bill. We'd just finish it Select Committee and that would be it, done and dusted. But that's not the way we do it, and the reason is because sometimes fresh eyes can alert us to issues that perhaps weren't picked up on at an earlier stage. That's why we have the ability to make amendments at the committee stage, because we want to be able to continually consider the legislation that is in front of us. And that's what's happened in this case, that at first reading we had a bill that was going to put into legislation the enrolment confirmation card. And that was something that we thought was a positive move because it meant that there was certainty around the enrolment confirmation card. It's something which has been available for the last few elections, but there's nothing in legislation that says that it is a requirement to have the enrolment confirmation card. And so, it was from an outside perspective, from someone who wasn't on the committee, that seemed like a positive step. For whatever reason, the Select Committee decided to remove it. But the removal of the legislative requirement for the enrolment confirmation card, combined with this new idea of requiring verbal confirmation. I actually think it's the combination of those two things. The possibility that the enrolment confirmation card may not be available and that someone will have to make a verbal confirmation of their name. You combine those two things together and you get a situation that will inevitably block some people from our democratic process. And one group of people that has been briefly mentioned in the debate this evening is new migrants, for whom English is a second language, and we know that new migrants are vastly overrepresented in the group of people who do not participate at election time. And one of the reasons for that is just simple language barriers. The fact that they don't feel confident in their ability to speak English, they don't feel confident enough in their ability to speak English, that they will be able to go to the polling booth and successfully complete all the processes there. Now, if you add to that the fact that they have to make a verbal confirmation, that is just one more barrier. And it's not, as the Minister implied in a rather silly fashion, I thought, that a person may not be able to pronounce their own name. Of course they're going to be able to pronounce their own name, but the person that they're having to say their name to may not understand the pronunciation. They may not understand how that name is spelt in the language, in the mother language of that person, may not be able to find them easily on the electoral roll, and may then deny them the opportunity to vote in that election. That is the kind of circumstance that we are concerned about. I don't think it's intentional from this government. I don't think it is intentional, but it is one of those unintended consequences that puts barriers up to people voting. And we've seen this in other countries in the world where perhaps it's been a little bit more intentional, that changes made to electoral law in the name of reducing voter fraud have in fact been a device for denying people, particularly people at the margins of society, from being able to participate in electoral processes. I am not, Mr. Chairman, I am not making the case that the National Party has done this on purpose. I just think this is an unintended consequence, and we have the opportunity with the supplementary order papers. We've got a range of options here, any one of which we could pick up. Some are certainly better than others, but we could pick up any of the options that members have provided, and we would improve this law. We would be making electoral law that makes it easier to vote. Now, at the last election, we had the lowest voter turnout in something like a century. That should be concerning to all of us. But for some reason, it seems to be more concerning to members on this side of the House than it is to members on that side of the House. And maybe that's because they assume that the people who are least likely to participate in our elections are the people who are also least likely to vote for them. That's probably why there is more concern about it on this side of the House than there is on the other. But I think there's another reason why people didn't participate in the last election, and that's a certain level of cynicism about the way Parliament goes about creating electoral law. And if they were cynical before the last election, they're going to be even more cynical after it, because as members have mentioned earlier in the debate, there is something enormous missing from this legislation, and that is the abolishment of the one-seat threshold, better known out there in the public as the coat-tailing provisions. The abolition, fair enough. But what they know is they want to get rid of it. Mr. Simpson, they don't care how we say it in Parliament at 10 to 10 in the evening. They want us to get rid of it. The public have been absolutely clear. And in fact, the government was absolutely clear. They said, we're going to have a referendum on MMP. If the public chooses to keep MMP, we will then have a review, and we will look at some of those peripheral issues. And although there was a range of issues that we could be looking at, and the review, the Electoral Commission came back with 10 recommendations, the one that the public has been absolutely clear on is get rid of the coat-tailing. Now, the Minister, fair enough, she wrote to all the political parties and asked us for our views. We responded, and at that point the Minister said there is no consensus. How could there have been a consensus? There was absolutely no opportunity for political parties to get around the table and actually talk about what we were prepared to negotiate on. There are things in those 10 recommendations that we in the Labour Party don't like, but we're prepared to sit down and talk about them and see if we can come to a consensus. I know that there are things that the Labour Party supports that New Zealand First doesn't like. I know there are aspects of it that the Greens don't like. But everybody on this side of the House actually wants the opportunity to sit around the table and see if we can reach a consensus. Why has that not happened? Quite simply because National and their mates in the United Future Party and the ACT Party that are so reliant on the coat-tailing provisions have put their own interests ahead of what the New Zealand public wants. And that is one of the reasons why New Zealanders are becoming so cynical about our political processes. Now, the right, they might be happy that they are turning people off voting. They might be happy. They might think that serves their own self-interests as well. But over on this side of the House, we believe in democracy. We believe in the right of people to have their say. And the people have overwhelmingly had their say on this issue. Get rid of the coat-tailing. There was no reason to have it in the first place. It resembles a mechanism in Germany for parties that have strong regional representation to find their way into Parliament. We don't have regional diversity of party representation in this country. We're a small nation. We don't have little enclaves where particular parties are strong. What's happened, of course, is something that was brought in for worthy purposes has been absolutely abused by the parties of the right. There's no reason for it. We would lose nothing by getting rid of it, but what we have by having it in our electoral law is an opportunity for parties to rort the system. It's time for it to go, sir. And luckily, although it's not included in this legislation, we will soon have an opportunity. I've written to all members, I've extended an olive branch, and I hope they'll support me.
Jamie Lee Ross.
I move that the question be now put.
Point of order.
I've been waiting a turn to speak, Mr. Chairman. I have a supplementary order paper that I've not had an opportunity to speak to yet, and I would like that opportunity.
Well, that's not a point of order because someone's just moved a closure motion and I didn't get a chance to accept it or reject it before the point of order came. So, the Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.